Hey YouTube! So it's Cass Forever back with my first video that is going to be about building a track. So when I build a track, I usually start with a few key factors. Now, just as like an overview, I don't know if you are an experienced producer or songwriter, but mostly I think when people build a track, they start with some kind of key idea. So for different producers and different engineers, that's going to be a hook, maybe that's going to be a bass line, a drum pattern, some kind of groove, or even just a really cool sample that you want to figure out how to use in some sort of new exciting context. So when I build my tracks, I usually will start with some kind of vocal outline, whether that's maybe a hook or a melody. It might just be a melody without lyrics, and I'll play that in on a synth. And then after that, I tend to try to outline my structure of my song. So whether I'm in Pro Tools or Ableton, maybe you produce on one of those, maybe you use FL, maybe you use Logic. A really helpful tool I find for workflow maximization is putting in markers for your song. So you can move sort of these session markers. In Ableton, they're called locators. They're usually possible. I don't know if Logic has them, but maybe you even just want to write it out by hand or as a note on your phone in bars or timestamps, because if I'm thinking about a hook or a concept, usually I'll have some kind of instinct if I want it to be used for the chorus or for a verse. There's different characteristics depending on how you produce and write songs that you can flip those sections later, but I'll usually kind of toss them into some sort of general section by section layout to start. So then that helps me think within a constraint, because I think a lot of people when they're building a track, especially when you're starting to get into production, you're not sure where to start and you get really overwhelmed really fast. And I remember feeling that way like all the time. I remember watching my friends work, just flying through producing like bass line and then synths and then harmony and then chords and then leads and then vocal leads and then vocal harmonies and doubles and drums and drum patterns and live drums and samples, and it just blew my mind. But now that I've got several years of producing under my belt, I think of it like outlining something on a canvas. So if you put in your structural markers first, I think that helps you work on some kind of formula, essentially. But it doesn't have to be a pop song formula. It doesn't have to be a verse, chorus, pre-drop kind of thing, like any kind of electronic music structure. But it can be even an A and a B section. It can be A, B, and bridge, and final A. Something what's called ternary, Ternary. Ternary form is like where you have a one section and then a contrasting section. So I start with my structural markers, and then I'll usually put in a harmony, and I'll pick a key. That is usually dependent on, I have my own vocal keys that I know work for me, but if it's for a client, I'll make a note of what key I'm playing everything in, and I'll also maybe save my preset of whatever the synth that I'm using, whatever I've modulated it to, if it's software. Saving your own presets, especially if you're jamming out on like Contact or Omnisphere or like any of the really common Spire synths and stuff like that, any of those, it's really helpful to save your preset as well in your plugins, because then you can go back and you don't have to be like, oh my god, I can never duplicate the sound again, what will I do? No, you can take a picture of your hardware synth as well. I've done that before, and that can kind of help you get back into the same framework if you have to change the key of something that you're playing it in, or you just want to be able to redo it. So those are a couple of workflow tips that I have when I'm building my track. And so I'll lay down my harmony. Usually I'll keep it really simple to start, and I'll play it maybe within an octave and a half on a keyboard. Now, I'm a keyboard player, so I usually lay stuff down in live time. But if you're not a keyboard player, not to fear, because you can really easily lay it down in MIDI. I know a lot of people who work exclusively just by inputting the notes in MIDI and then moving them around. Something that I think is also super useful that blew my mind when I first heard about it a few years ago was layering your synths. So maybe you have a grand piano sound and you have a pad sound that you really like, maybe a lead, some kind of triangle, like twangy synth, or a saw kind of that you want to shimmer in at some point during your harmony. You can either change the velocities and the attack and release times of each of them so that one is something that starts at the first hit of the note that you're hitting or the chord, and then something else sort of can float in, and then something else can be the tail end sort of release factor. This can help you with sound design starting at that first point when you're working on your track. So you are thinking about the tone and the texture that you want to be using for your track right as you are just outlining some of the basic ideas. And to me, that helps you stay creative at every level of building your track versus really feeling like maybe the creativity is only coming in with the chords that you choose or the lyric that you're going to use or the drum samples that you're going to choose. Being able to layer and incorporate that aspect of sound design into your production is something that's going to also help you build your trademark sounds and basically find your identity as a producer. I know that a lot of producers swear by their drum samples that they use. They sell them online, and guess what? A lot of the times they're just layered samples done exactly as I just described. Having different parts of a sound, different sections of them fade in and out, or make up different parts of your sound envelope in that sense of the ADSR. You can also chop up samples and layer them and crossfade them. Some people will do that. That'll kind of give you a little bit more of like a textural effect if you're using samples and not a lot of MIDI work. So anyhow, back to talking about structure. I will start with my form and then lay down harmonies. Usually at that point when it's harmonic, I'm already trying to sing a melody over top of it. If you don't sing, that's totally cool. You can probably sing if you're alone in your studio anyway, and that'll help you figure out some of the direction that you want to go melodically, and you'll do it without a lot of pressure above performance. If you're sort of nervous about singing in front of other people, it'll get over that hump because then you'll be able to kind of be a bit more familiar with your style. Even if you're not a trained singer or anything like that, even if you don't like your sound. But I think singing is a really helpful tool when you're building a track either way, and it helps you just stay in your body a little bit. So yeah, find your melody, whether you're singing or if you want to play it. A lot of people will play it in on a synth, a lot of people will program something in on MIDI. Sometimes your melody can come from multiple samples that you're going to use. So sometimes you'll take a horn line and then you'll invert it, or you'll chop it up or reorder it. Be careful with that stuff because of copyright, obviously, if you're not using total royalty-free samples. And there's different levels, I think, of royalty-free samples. I'll research it and make another video talking about that because I know that some samples you can use for your own personal use, but as soon as you're using it in mass distribution, it changes the royalty classification from free to owing some amount of money. So yeah, you can find your melody in a lot of different ways in that context. I think that building from a hook perspective, and that's not necessarily meaning hook in a traditional way, like having a lyric hook that's going to go in your hook section in a chorus of a pop song. That's more so thinking of hooks as things that your listener can latch onto. So samples for sure, textures for sure, chords can be a hook, a guitar line can be a hook, a drum pattern can be a hook. I didn't know that even the drum pattern that starts Umbrella is a GarageBand loop. But that's a hook. That counts as a hook. Yeah, anything can be a hook if you can figure out how to contextualize it in a way that it'll mean something to your listener and it'll be something that they want to hear over and over again. So that's something that you can play with within your structure. Sometimes you'll use something and it'll wind up being something that you actually have to move to another section of the song, and that'll be the context that it breathes in best. I think as a producer, imagining the different varieties of your end product is really important, and how people are going to hear it and listen to what you've made and how someone's going to maybe top line on it. If you're songwriting at the same time as producing, then try to think of the different aspects of your melody and how you can reference the key points that act like hooks in the context of your production. So when I produce, I like to produce with my songwriter at least until we have a concept of a hook or a structure and a key or a scale or whichever that the singer can sort of work around, or the songwriter, for the top line, because then that lets me build a really strong focal point around those building blocks as sort of pillars of my production. And then I'm not going to waste my time having to go back and take things out that aren't serving the song as a whole later. Anyway, that's kind of my basic building blocks of starting to build a track. My first time making one video that's just one long shot, so I hope you don't mind when I rambled off into a couple of different directions. And thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay.